Hello and welcome to The Acclivity. And I am Dr. Loren M. Hill, your academic career coach. I'm happy to have with us today Dr. Yvonne Styles, who is just an extraordinary woman and someone who has had quite an interesting career path. She was in what we call out here in California in the industry, meaning that she was in Hollywood. She has lived and worked abroad. She's lived in Paris. She's traveled the world. She has a PhD, and she's been in C-suite positions in nonprofits. And if that were not all, she has been attached to higher ed for probably about 20 years now, working at various institutions as an academic faculty in undergraduate and graduate programs. So welcome, Dr. Styles. Welcome to our podcast.
Wow, what a lovely introduction. I want to thank you, Dr. Hill, for the accolades and also for the opportunity to have a dialogue with you.
You're very welcome, and it's my pleasure. And I'm sure that you're going to have a lot of great information to share with our audience today. So I'd like to start by asking you sort of how did you end up here today with us, having had such a sort of winding career path? I mean, being in Hollywood, then being in behavioral health, then being, in the nonprofit industry, being in C-suite, doing coaching. Wow. I mean, how did we wind up here today?
Wow, I guess if you talk about it in those terms, it seems circuitous and winding. But from my point of view, there's a logic and a central theme to my life and to my work, and that is wanting to get the story right. So in my early life, my career was about telling stories about people like me who you didn't see very much on the screen. And I came to California with the youthful dream of telling stories about marginalized populations, of which I consider myself. So I had a lot of satisfaction working in the industry. I was what they used to call a D girl, which meant development. And I also, got to live some of my heartfelt dreams as a young person. Got to work with really talented writers, some of whom are still my friends today. And I won't say that I'm out of the industry permanently, but it dawned on me probably, about 10 years into my career that it was a little difficult to be the arbiter of my destiny if I was working in Hollywood, because it was all predicated on deals and the culture, what was popular and what wasn't. And at that time, reality television started taking hold in society and also in the business, because it was a very effective way to grab eyes on the screen without spending a whole lot of money. So having worked in television and cable and some film, I decided that maybe I wanted to consider doing something else with my life, something that I could be in control of. And I went to graduate school. That happened simultaneously as the uprising with the Rodney King violence, and his beating really transformed my community. And I thought that I wanted to be a part of a change, a system of change that was inclusive for young boys and girls of color. The terminology I started to hear a great deal back then was the permanent underclass. And for me, having been a person that was always engaged politically, that just seemed, first of all, despairing and antithetical to what America is supposed to represent. And so I gave it a lot of thought, and I believe that the way to help people, really help people, is to be in a non-judgmental position. And I thought clinical counseling and therapy was a way to join with families and young people and empower them. So I developed helping models that I would hope still have impact in the community. I worked really hard to help as many people as I could for a very intense period. Did what they call now trauma informed wraparound services. That led me to becoming more and more interested in funding sources and organizational management. So I have a couple of master's degrees, one in human systems and one in clinical psychology with an emphasis on children and adolescents. And then I want to do a PhD in organizational psych because I was very interested in how people organize and also how the dynamics of psychology impacts the workplace experience. So that's how I arrived at my career in terms of business, but in terms of practice now as a consultant and a coach, I just feel like one of the great things about coaching is that you do not need to be the expert to facilitate growth. And so I'm enjoying this iteration of my career because it allows me to empower other people with just um, framing, reframing, and exploring. And so I love coaching for that reason. I do a lot of consulting, as you know, with nonprofit organizations, but also with for-profit organizations as well. So anyway, this is a very rewarding period in my life and career.
Wow, that is certainly an amazing journey. And I really appreciate and was struck by some of the terms that you reminded me of, and that was the permanent underclass. I think people sort of get used to, well, there's always going to be that element, right? Or that segment of the population. And if you are in that population, as you said, it can be sort of hopeless, right? And so I also know that you became an academician to assist people of color so they could see you in positions of leadership, as well as your counseling program that you developed and being holding C-suite positions. I know that a lot of that was sort of based upon people having access to a woman of color in a position of, faculty or administration, or as an executive. Can you talk to us a little bit more about, you being visible in those positions and probably what it meant to students, mentees, practicum students? What was your experience around that?
Well, I have always believed that it's incumbent on those of us who are holding the space to ensure that we're not the last ones. And so when I was working as a executive, I had a very robust training program for emergent counselors and clinicians. And I guess because of thought leadership in the field, I was invited to start teaching. Never did think of myself as an academician, but once I got into the academy and I remembered the joy of learning and the joy of dialogue and reading and considering myself a lifelong learner, I started teaching um, at the undergraduate level initially, and then went on to graduate studies. And one of my greatest I guess rewards has been supporting doctoral students of color, Black and Brown students who started the journey with a lot of uncertainty, and being able to support them in their exploration and finding their voice academically, and also supporting their research. we need the energy, we need the perspectives of youth, but we also need just a lot of non-judgmental practitioners in the field that can help us in solving the grave problems facing communities of color, as you well know, Dr. Hill. So the academy is a place of discovery. And for me, when I was teaching, there was times that I was teaching 3, 4 classes per term as an adjunct. What I love doing is watching the lights go on in the students' eyes and seeing them become really excited by new ways of thinking, new theories, or even finding their own approach and their own framing of some of the problems and the solutions that we were seeking to find. Watch a lot of the lexicon change. When we started, well, I won't speak for you, but for me, we didn't always talk about trauma-informed care, but that's, really empowering language now. And listening to even now, trauma-informed coaching, is something that, I got certified in doing and am able to serve communities at every level, whether it's executive coaching, whether it's academic, as you do so well, helping people have self knowledge, self-awareness, and efficacy and agency is something that continues to feed my soul. So I love doing that.
So, as you mentioned, there's now a lot of informed coaching, a lot of training. People might say, well, I'm in the academy, I'm in higher ed. What would I need, trauma informed coaching for? And what I might say to that is, I've been in higher ed for well over 25 years now, almost going on 30, and I experienced trauma in a couple of few of the institutions that I was at. Some of it was had to do with interpersonal, and then some of it had to do with just goodness of fit, me not fitting at the university and not realizing that. And I think that, although I certainly benefited from therapy, I think I could have benefited from some coaching from a trauma-informed perspective. And I'm, because the coaching that I was receiving didn't quite, it seemed like it was like, you can get, you can do it. You can do it. I'm here to cheer you on. And you're like, wait a minute, how can I do it when I'm facing this, and that, and stressed out, feeling overwhelmed. And, I'm not sure if you had those experiences as an adjunct or to the degree that I had them when I was a full-time faculty or an administrator. But I'm wondering if you could speak to, coaching someone in the academy when they may be going through something very stressful, or dare I say traumatic.
First of all, Dr. Hill, there's a gap in terms of how efficacious people, how they see themselves in context versus how we're seen by dominant cultures. And so when those two intersect, there's impact, and that impact a lot of times is traumatic. So yes, I personally have experienced it. Again, one of the new terms for what we're talking about, microaggressions or even macroaggressions. So helping people who are in the academy understand their experience. Sometimes the subjective experience does not allow for you to process some of the cultural dynamics. So what a coach can do is help you proportionalize and frame issues so that you can be empowered rather than injured by other people's agendas. So I'm working, as a matter of fact, with a client presently who is convinced that every interaction is a microaggression. I'm not necessarily in agreement, but I do think it's important for the client to define for themselves what they're experiencing. But the point is that what a coach does is bring validation and value to the experience while you're, basically internalizing what you're feeling and going through. The coach has the ability to lift you up and out of your experience so that you can learn and be empowered by what is fact, what is truth, and what serves you. Regrettably, human beings learn more when they're in adverse conditions than when they're in favorable conditions. And so the myth of the kind of, superwoman is served by the fact that people like me have had to battle so much adversity. And so, in some sense, that resilience is should not ever be taken for granted. But that's another virtue of having a coach, is to remind you of your resilience and how to frame things so it serves your personal narrative. Because I do believe ultimately we are always the protagonists in our own story.
Yes, that is true. And I certainly understand that from my perspective as well. And having worked with people who have gone through very traumatic experiences. And so I'd like to think about it now, take a little bit of a shift and talk about why it might be beneficial to work with a coach, even if you're not experiencing some stressful times or some trauma, because some people may think, well, everything's going fine in my career. I don't really need anybody to help me at this point, or I don't think I need anybody to talk to. And so I know for me, that has kind of been few and far between. I've usually been in places where I'm like, I need somebody to help me. But then there's times where I've had support from mentors or peers or, champions or sponsors, and not really thought much about getting a coach when things were going right. So what are some of the what's some of your thoughts about having a coach when all seems to be going well?
Well, the point is we are human, and growth is something that is always appealing. No one, no matter how successful we are, wants to remain stagnant. And so what a coach enables is reflection and growth. And, you know, just because your circumstances may be favorable does not mean that there's not room for change and growth. And so I think having a coach is wonderful in that you can have the psychological safety that affords you exploration of the self and your circumstances. And, when coaching is done at its best, it's like having your vision board or your dream board personified. It's the person that holds your best possible self and helps you to achieve that. And so for me, having been coached and also having provided coaching and, psychotherapy, there's a big distinction to me between seeking help when you're in distress versus seeking growth when you're comfortable. And that's what I think coaching is about, is seeking growth and maximizing whatever opportunities that you find yourself with. So I don't know if that gets at what you were asking, Dr. Hill, but I feel like coaching is a way to engender growth without, pathology. Without, you don't have to have a problem in order to seek growth and opportunity for self-development. Um, I think coaching is the way of things, the way of the future, because people, um, I've coached, provided life coaching, executive coaching, as you do academic coaching. People want to make sense of their lives. I think that is the more and more true As life gets more complicated out there, we want more congruence in here. So I think coaching is going to probably be the way of the future. But I do think that being a trained clinician helps. I think knowing what you're doing is important. I think certification matters. You know, everybody that's calling themselves a coach, my goodness, you know, but there are some standards and ethics that we have to attend to as well.
So I think that uh, there definitely needs to be more support around coaching, particularly for BIPOC people. And I have found that coaching has, many people have benefited from coaching, and generally the folks who benefit from it happen to be in the dominant culture, and even more so male. So I wonder what your thoughts are about, sort of trying to level the playing field, if you will, by being a woman of color, a coach, targeting a specific segment to help lift them up, and even be available to those who we sort of referenced earlier, who may not have even heard of a coach before, or if they have heard of it, it's really limited to athletics.
Well, that's a great point in terms of access, Dr. Hill. And you may recall, since I've known you for at least a couple of decades, that one of my credos was that psychotherapy shouldn't only be for the rich. And I'd say the same thing about coaching. It should not only be for people who have resources, because as I said, all of us are aspirational. And so access to coaching is about doing what we're doing now, which is getting the word out. Styles Behavioral Services, my company, tries to invite coaching as a dialogue around issues of diversity, around workplace culture. So I think the more we can talk about it, the more we can provide coaching models that are maybe limited but successful. When I say limited, I mean maybe someone contracts with me for a definite period of coaching, but it's solution focused, or really targets an area of growth that person wants to. And maybe, I don't know about you, but some people like me may have a sliding scale available to people, taking everyone in their own context. But I think if a person is serious about coaching, there'll be more and more options for them to pursue it. Again, talking it up is so important, because a lot of people who might want coaching, they don't have requisite information, how to find a coach, how to identify what is a good coach. And so the more we can talk it up, share podcasts like your own, that's one of the ways that we can saturate the field with opportunities and information.
Hmm. Thanks for that. And yes, I agree with you. I think that people who are even considering coaching should reach out and connect, because it begins with a conversation, and you never know what might happen. Maybe you'll end up with a scholarship, or maybe the coach will have some time available to provide you with a few sessions at either low or no fee, or provide you with some resources. And so normalizing the coaching relationship and experience, I think, is important. And so was there a time that you can think back in terms of your work in higher ed, where maybe a coach would have been beneficial to you? I'm wondering if maybe before you took on your teaching position, or maybe once you had been at one institution for a while and were considering moving to another one. Any of those things, or maybe something I didn't even mention that you thought about in, sort of looking backwards, because we have people listening who are in many different points, and maybe there's something that we might say today that will help them make that appointment for a coaching.
Well, I would say that my early start as a instructor and faculty member, that afforded me, I had a coach, and this person was experienced in the academy and helped me a lot with formulating a professional identity, because I think that's really at issue, is how many of us have a sense of entitlement around being a teacher or being an instructor. Usually those positions, people are groomed for them. And so since when I began teaching, it was so few African-American professors that I could look to that were not my teachers, my instructors. So I would say that once I began teaching, how to go to the next level was a challenge that I would have benefited from having a coach. Because when you're immersed in a situation, it's very difficult to plot a course. You're just kind of in. And one thing I remember saying is like, oh my goodness, academia is as political as Hollywood. Who knew? But the stakes are really high. And I was just reading, I want to share, it's a digression, but it's relevant. I was reading a story about a professor who is tenured at UCLA in ecology, and she's a woman of color. And when she started to talk about discriminatory practices there, she lost, she was suspended for, I think, a 2-year period without salary. So that's a situation where I think having a coach would have been helpful to her, because I think what we want to talk about, how we want to change systems, may require more intention and more planning. And a coach is great for that. Rather than being reactive or emotional when obstacles occur, if you have a coach, there are ways that you can manage change and challenges in a proactive and positive way that will not have detriment on your career. So having an academic coach may be something that you should have throughout the career lifespan, actually speaking, particularly in high stakes academic environments like UCLA. So yeah, I do think academic coaching is a necessity if you have ambition of being in the long-term administration of an institution or academy.
Well, that is really an interesting story, and sadly, not something that is a one-off or rare. And so I think that your point is well taken in terms of having a career strategist with you to help you navigate these things that will occur and will ultimately impact negatively or positively your career in higher ed. And let me just say that it's very rare that some decision you make will be neutral, right? So whether that's to speak up or stay silent, someone's going to notice what you do. So if you plan on planting your flag on a particular hill, you want to make sure that you have been very strategic about it. And you and I operate from strategic points of view. And I'm, hopeful that she will be vindicated in her position. And I also think that, yes, that is definitely a high profile university. But I tell you, in my experience, I've seen these types of things happen at lesser known institutions, and probably a little bit more so because they understand that nobody's going to be watching out, or nobody's going to look at her. It's not going to make big news or noteworthy. So you can really find yourself alone and isolated and, dare I say, without a job, if you aren't thinking about this in a very strategic way. And so with that also in mind, you can recover, right? Working with a coach can help you recover from a sort of a job injury or a job injustice. And it is, again, about being strategic and, sort of taking a step back and having somebody coach you through the recovery process. What are your thoughts about that, Dr. Styles?
Absolutely. And I think the great thing about life is that, we can learn from everything. And when there's been injury, a lot of times it's hard to separate the lesson from the lingering pain. So a coach is a great facilitator for making, dare I say, lemonade out of lemons. But the bottom line is that the career path is longer and longer. We're living longer, we're productive for longer periods. So hopefully your audience is thinking all the time about next steps and ways that we can utilize our experience. I mean, our society is not so rich in intellectuals that we could ever turn away any learned folks. People who have something to offer in the academy are the treasures of this culture. And so I do think that having someone to be a thought partner with you, and let's put it like this, a coach is nothing more than a thought partner, someone that's going to help you stay centered on value creation or advancement. And so, maybe in the next 5, 10 years, it will be part of graduating guidance. Get yourself an academic coach. If you want to be a tenured professor, you need to know what are the steps, what helps you and what accelerates your goals. So, yeah, I just think that it's a very powerful tool as your listeners and folks watching this. You have to determine what's going to be your toolkit for advancement. And I hope coaching is in the toolkit.
Well, that is great. And I definitely am hopeful that, sooner rather than later, coaching will be part of career advancement and professional development in the academy. And it is a much needed tool and often unknown about or not sought after. Or what happens is if you sort of get in trouble and you need to be on a performance plan, may end up with a coach. But ironically, if you are in administration, you generally can get a coach because they feel like it's part of your package, right? So one of the things that I'm really hoping is that it will be part of everybody's package. Once you are an employee with the particular institution, part of your package is that you receive professional development coaching. And until that time, I'm encouraging folks to really advocate for themselves and invest in themselves, and whether that's using your professional development funds, whether it's going to HR and asking how can I be reimbursed for this? And if they say, you know what, we don't have any money for that right now, or that's a bit outside of our resources, it's okay to take your own money and invest in yourself and think about the returns that you will end up with. Like investing in your coaching now will give you rich returns and rewards throughout your career trajectory. So I want to thank you, Dr. Styles, for joining us today and telling us about your journey and your thoughts about having a career coach when you're in higher ed. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And once again, I am Dr. Loren M. Hill. I am your academic career coach. And be sure to listen to us and subscribe and like and comment. Watch us on YouTube and follow us on all social media. Thank you again for your time.